Genesis is a fitting name for the first book of the Bible. It's a Greek word that means beginning. The book starts out with the phrase, "in the beginning," and the first two chapters go on to describe the beginnings of the universe. I think it's helpful to think of the whole book of Genesis as setting the stage for the rest of the Bible. All the rest of the Bible assumes that the reader has some idea of the foundations laid in Genesis. In fact, it's fascinating to read the last two chapters of Revelation after reading the first two chapters of Genesis. The Bible ends in the same place where it begins, in a new perfect creation where God dwells with his people. In this video, I'd like to walk with you through the first chapter of Genesis. It's God's own account of his creation of the world in 6 days. Since it recounts each day in order, the days serve as helpful divisions for this study. The first day is verses 1 through 5. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. At first glance, verse 1 might seem like a title for the chapter, but it's actually God's first creative act. Heavens and the earth is a figure of speech called a merism that names two ends of a spectrum to refer to everything inside of them. God's first act was to create everything from all the way down here to all the way up there. But that doesn't mean that he was finished. It was all formless and empty and dark. All matter was in existence, but it was all disordered. It wasn't assembled yet. I picture it as a gigantic muddy blob, kind of like you bought the most complex shelving unit at IKEA, brought home the boxes, and dumped out all the hardware on the floor. Over the next 5 days, God is going to put it all together. On the first day, God also spoke light into existence. Where was the light coming from? Well, that's a good question. This is also when time began, and the light provided a way to measure time. There was a period of light and a period of darkness. Both of them together equaled a day. The second day, verses 6 to 8. And God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So notice how immediately God zeroes in on the earth. God brings everything into ever-increasing order. On the second day, he separates water above from water below, calling the area in between sky. It's difficult for me to follow exactly what he's describing. I imagine a still muddy blob of matter below and then something cloud-like above, sky in between. The third day, verses 9 through 13. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. On the second day, God separated water below from water above. On the third day, he separates water below from land below. So it's not a muddy blob anymore. There are land and seas. And then God adds vegetation. And notice how he designs it to reproduce. The earth begins to sprout with life, and that life proliferates through its seeds according to their kinds. When you plant an apple seed, you know what to expect. The fourth day draws our attention away from the earth back out to the universe. But notice how the bodies God sets in space are designed to serve the earth. Verses 14 through 19. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the fourth day. We can summarize it as sun, moon, and stars. They serve the earth as, number one, lights, two, clocks, and three, calendars. The greater light, the sun, provides light during the day. The lesser light, the moon, provides light during the night. The sun and moon also distinguish day from night. All the heavenly bodies together serve as calendars. Think of how our day is the amount of time it takes the earth to rotate on its axis. Our month is approximately the amount of time it takes the moon to revolve around the earth, and our year is the amount of time it takes the earth to revolve around the sun. I think the only big calendar type standard of time we're missing there is a week. The fifth day, verses 20 to 23. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living and moving thing with which the water teems, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. Birds and fish, or more precisely, animals that inhabit the air and animals that inhabit the water. We were told that on day 3 that God created plants to reproduce through their seeds. He also designed the birds and the fish to reproduce, but here it adds that he blessed them and commanded them to be fruitful and increase in number. The earth was filling up with more and more life, and God's intention was for it to proliferate even more. The sixth day takes us through the end of chapter 1. Let's break it up into two sections, starting with verses 24 to 28. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Air and water animals were on the fifth day. Now, land animals are the first order of business on the sixth day. He divides them up into three categories. You have livestock, wild animals, and then the creepy crawly things. All of them, again, according to their kinds. And that's about it. God started out with nothing, then moved on to a whole universe of disordered matter, and now everything is in its proper place except people. Years ago, there was a show called Extreme Makeover Home Edition. The producers would help out a family in need by sending them on vacation for a week, then tearing down their old non-functional home and building them a perfectly new house designed perfectly for them and their needs. This was an hour-long show. They usually finished building the house about 45 minutes in. But that wasn't the end of the show. They didn't build the house for the sake of building a house. They built it for the people. So the last 15 minutes, they bring in the family to their new house and show them around and saying, "Welcome home. This belongs to you." That's kind of like what God is doing. Once everything is in its proper place, God creates the people because he created it all for the people. Notice that there's an emphasis on God making humans in his image, in his likeness. God even has a conversation with himself about that. Closely connected to the concept of his image is that God gives humans the job of ruling over the other creatures of the world. Also, just as God told the air animals and water animals on the fifth day, God blesses humans and commands them to increase in number. God's plan is for life on earth to flourish. Now, wrapping up the sixth day of creation, verses 29 to 31. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. This section is largely about the diet of the human and animal kingdom. The seed-bearing fruit and plants God had made weren't only for the proliferation of plant life, they were also for the sustenance of human and animal life. There were no carnivores, only herbivores, so go vegans. I know I said this video was on Genesis chapter 1, but the first 3 verses of chapter 2 are rightfully part of the same section, so I'm going to read that too. So, chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating he had done. On the seventh day, God rested. The Hebrew word translated rest here may be familiar to you. It's Shabbat. We know it a little bit better as Sabbath, which is also the Hebrew word for Saturday. God didn't rest because he was tired. He rested because he was finished. He stopped. It's another way of saying that everything was perfect. There was absolutely no room for improvement. That's what perfect means. Another way that point is driven home throughout the chapter is through the use of the word good. Maybe you noticed that as you read. All along the way, it tells us that God takes these little steps back to evaluate his work. 6 times it says, God saw that it was good. But the phrase changes once everything is finished. Then it's, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good.